Today we are doing a Revenger deck profile. Now, this is a pretty old deck. This was actually my very first deck. I started with Revenger Raging Form, then went to Abyss. And so it's pretty nostalgic for me. I have upgraded it to be kinda more up to date with the current standards of the game. Regardless, this is not a competitive hyper meta deck or anything like that. This is just really solid fun and can still steal some games here and there. Now, this won't be your typical deck profile. A lot of the ideas behind the choices actually rely on understanding how this deck works. I will start by explaining what the whole point is of this build. It's basically all about this guy. His name has Revenger, Phantom, and Blaster. This means you have 3 archetypes of cards and support you get to use in one deck. So you have access to Revenger cards like this, you have access to Blaster cards like this, and you have access to Phantom cards like this. The deck became very irrelevant because G-Guards came out. All our finishers, the Legion restand and stuff, couldn't deal with G-Guards. It also had some very heavy counterblast issues. A lot of this has actually been solved now, and that's because of him. Dragstrider Luard makes such huge columns, and because all our other finishers are stopped by G-Guards, people will waste their G-Guards until we eventually go into him and win. So getting into the actual deck profile, knowing that the end game is actually depleting their G-Guards and then winning with him, we run 8 draws. We just want gigantic hands at all times and then win. This deck is very turtle, this deck is very slow, but it's a lot of fun. Then of course we still have 4 crits because we want this to be very painful. Apart from that, we can also recycle these because we run a Legion. Finally, 4 heals. So for grade 3, we run only this. We never want to ride anything else because we always want access to all the archetypes. In the early game, we might hit a draw trigger or 2, so we generally don't miss our grade 3. If we do, of course, that's going to be painful, but that's that. So you will often just ride him and just keep on striding. If you notice your deck is going low because this deck draws so damn fucking much, you Legion, push your triggers back, and then everything is set up to basically win with a quadruple drive, all hitting triggers because of your Legion and your deck thinning. 4 of this guy. People hate losing their starters. Tavas hates losing Mitros or even Bubble Edge. Overlord hates losing Conroe. CTB hates losing Chrono Dran. This card is very undervalued because Revengers is so shite now. 4 mana. We run Revengers purely because mana and more are so good. The fact that you can turn 1 card into 2 is amazing once you go into Aura Geyser and Dragstrider. It also deck thins and allows you to search more, which then allows you to search Stride Fodder, further mitigating that lack of grade 3s you run and deck thinning yet again. Keep in mind, by 3rd stride your deck is just triggers. Not even kidding, 90% of your deck will be triggers because of the amount you tin with this deck. Also free value an Aura Geyser turn and so forth. 3 Blaster Dark Revenger, he's our only counter charge engine, but we generally don't really need a lot of counterblast because he's so free. For Ezreal, this deck has 17 card hands at all times against any deck, every fucking deck. The amount of draw triggers and drawing from Judge Bow and drawing from Aura Geyser is so insane that you will constantly have 2 PGs and enough fodder to PG as much as you want. There is no reason to be running Karma Collector, you don't use a lot of CB, and the draws together with this recycling just makes this deck able to turtle for ages. The fact that this isn't Luard restricted makes this deck so good. For Dorint, our counter charge engine, and also fodder to search with mana. 2 Karen, because we run a Blaster Vanguard, this is so free on Aura Geyser. Kind of the same effect you get with mana. Also great for on Dragstrider turns. And you can search it out with Judge Bow. Just so much value. 3 Stride Fodder because we do run limited grade 3s. 2 Swordbreaker because we do run Judge Bow. Just to quickly explain, Judge Bow, it boosts the Phantom Vanguard. You hit, goes into Soul, search for 2, Soul Blast 2, draw 2. Your hand becomes huge, you have a field ready. You can retire these to get Ezreal, you can retire these for Aura Geyser and get even more draws. This deck pluses so much, just like in the good old days, but then you also have the extra cards we got over the years. Finally, 2 Mar. He searches for even more of your grade 3. So what you often will do is you have 1 mana in hand, call mana, fetch this from the deck, fetch this to hand. So you went -1/+1, but also +1 here, and you always have your fodder and you can then retire these for Aura Geyser and plus even more. For G-Zone, we have 4 Aura Geyser Dragon. We will pretty often go into 2. It just pluses so much, we really don't care. Let them waste some resources, let us build gigantic hands and then go for the kill. 4 of this, because no one is really expecting this card anymore due to how Luar just has better finisher options, we can often cheese games with just this. Apart from that, Savas really hates running into this guy. They run so much resist now, they will either have to overextend just to keep this from happening or die to it, or waste all their G-guards on it, which then means they get fucked by him. 2 Dragstrider. He's basically the only unit that makes this deck somewhat kinda maybe viable. We always have 15 card hands. We don't care, we have to discard so much to make him gigantic. We win that turn. We basically turtle and turtle and turtle, keep thinning the deck with all these options we have in this deck. Then Legion send those final triggers back into the deck, and then finally Dragstride, gigantic, only hit triggers. It's actually pretty interesting how this keeps working. So he's our savior. He's the only reason this deck actually kind of works. Carnivore, for if we're really counterblast starved and also to empty maybe some field here and there. We don't mind ditching the Swordbreaker or maybe even a Mar we called out with Judge Bow or Mana. And meanwhile, they just keep minusing. 1 Ogma, really good in the Tavos matchup when they have a lot of resist. Same idea as our Diablo. I don't really often go into him though. Plotmaker, the freest G-guard in the game. And one of her, just even more deck thinning. Really gets your drop zone set up for either getting more Ezras to hand or just to go to Ritual 7 to get your Dragstrider plays. So how will this deck usually run? You will start off with Judge Bow. Then you will ride any fucking grade 1. Then you will often ride something like this. You will have your Mana and your Judge Bow. Let's say you call down something like this, you kill their starter, swing, whatever, your turn. By this time you usually hit like 2 draw triggers already just because you run so many. You swing, Judge Bow goes into Soul. Let's say you fucked up, so you already have a Swordbreaker in hand. Call 1 Swordbreaker, call 1 Karen. It's their turn. They really don't do much yet. You have such a gigantic hand, you can easily G-guard whatever. You go like this, push even more stuff into the drop zone. Hey, it's an Ezras, whatever. You killed this one to get your Ezras to hand. You did, of course, stride Aura Geyser. You killed this one with Aura Geyser. You keep plussing and plussing and plussing. Now it's maybe time a little bit later into the game to Legion. Your deck is now really fucking thin. By now you've probably used some manas to get some Mars, to get some Stride Fodder to hand. Your deck is really, really thinned. It's full of triggers. You do your Legion bullshit. They maybe waste a G-guard on it. Next turn, you have a 17 card hand. You go into Dragstride, maybe call down a Karen or whatever, and you win. That's how this deck works. It's not a top tier deck at all. It's not competitive, I'm not saying that, but it's pretty funny how such an old deck with minor upgrades can still function pretty well. I think it's a pretty original build. I'm actually very in love with it because it's such a nostalgia boost for me. And yeah, it's just all in good fun. Steal some games, even from meta decks. Can really fuck with Tavos, especially the Tavos matchup is so painful for Tavos, not for him. These are actually pretty good against that. And it really catches some people off guard. You always have giant hands. Like no one thinks this 3-year-old deck will have a 20 card hand, and yes, 20 if you start overcalling. It's very easy to deck out. Regardless, this was my little nerdy nostalgia trip. Hope you like this deck profile. It's very different from what I usually do. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the Solemn Vanguard channel for more, and maybe leave a comment what you think about this deck. Will you build it yourself? Do you have your own kind of nostalgia deck that you built and upgraded over the years? Let me know. Ciao!